My name is Stephen Karashinsky, uh, CEO and co-founder of a company called Zero. And like I said, we are a focused telephony and contact center shop. We've been in business for about 14 years. Before that, I spent a little over 6 years at Cisco in various account management and channel functions, and left Cisco with some colleagues to start this business because we just found it so difficult for our colleagues to get the help and support they needed when they needed it. In fact, the co-founder who I work with today is a friend of mine since back in the high school days. So yes, those things still continue. You can have friends for a very long time. He was actually running a medium-sized business. They needed to make some changes in their communication systems. He asked me what to do. I gave him some advice and put in the right direction, said, hey, call this company, ask them for this. Here's what you need. And when he went to go and purchase those things, get help from that provider, he would get answers like, we don't do that, we can't help you, and things like that. So that's when we were like, hey, there's a problem here. There's a market that needs real help and support, and so we jumped into business and to do it. 14 years later, very proud of the things that we're able to do, and I'll share some of that with you today. And at the core, I live in Montreal, probably 3/4 of the year, the other quarter in South Florida, a little south of you, Jonathan, in Orlando. I've got three young daughters at home who keep me very, very busy and on my toes. And I love football, so it's kind of figuring out what to do on my weekends these days without football. But there's a USFL around the corner in April, so we'll see if that can tie me over and whatnot.
Just switch to NASCAR for the summer.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good idea. That's a very good idea. So, here's the agenda that I came up with as around this. And again, this is feedback that I'm getting from a lot of people. So I thought it could be relevant. So why are organizations moving to Teams calling in the first place? Because, it's a big buzz, but what is actually driving this? What does that Teams calling migration journey actually look like? And what are some best practices? And when we think about best practices around Teams Phone, most of the world focuses on implementation. How do I go from what I have today to Teams calling in the future? But what we've noticed is when you're laser focused on just one aspect of the journey and not the whole aspect, you miss some pretty important things. And that's where inefficiencies get created. Maybe some of the experience isn't as optimal as it could be. There's a little bit more risk involved in the migration, and there really doesn't have to be. So on the best practices that we're going to share, it's really looking through the entire customer journey on this, and I hope it's valuable. Again, as I'm moving through this, if you have questions, you don't have to raise your hand. You can just interrupt me. This time is for you. I don't see everything that's going on because of the way Teams is laid out. So maybe Josh or Jonathan, if you see a hands up or something in the chat, just call it out for me, just because I probably don't see it and I wouldn't want to miss it. So I'm happy to share that moving to Teams calling is really a no-brainer. People make it out to be that it's like a climbing Mount Everest thing, and there's a lot of perceived risks involved in a move because the phone system has always been that black box that's kind of sitting there. It's working. We don't touch it unless we really have to. And the other challenge around PBX and phone system is the folks that are there today supporting and managing it probably weren't the folks that set it up. So there's some knowledge gap, and coupled with the fact that nothing is really documented on the telephony side in PBX causes a little bit of anxiety and thus risk. And hey, if we're gonna make a move, are we gonna miss something? Are there some critical elements in there that we haven't thought of? So those are some of the things that cause concern and hesitation on the voice side. But if we can mitigate those risks with proper planning and a little bit of foresight, moving to Teams calling is really a no-brainer. And as much as some of the key drivers around this is, one, when you're making a move to Teams calling, there's an opportunity to contain costs or even reduce costs in many cases. One of the advantages of moving to Microsoft, especially if you have an E5, and you brought this up, Dana. You may not today, but organizations that do, having all of the license, you already have all of the licenses. I haven't seen a lot of moves to E5 driven by voice. They're typically all security related, and that's where the ROI is built out when working through that licensing exercise. However, if there was a business case and need to move to E5, you've got the phone system in there, and so to manage a separate phone system when you've already got it in there doesn't make a ton of sense. The other thing that goes on when you're moving your phone system is the opportunity to revisit your telecom spend on your SIP trunking, on your phone lines, on your 1FLs. And there is a huge opportunity to reduce costs because PSTN in and of itself is fairly commoditized today. I mean, you can buy PSTN from just about anywhere. I mean, Amazon sells PSTN today. Maybe not off the shelf on a one click, but you could buy it from them. And so it just goes to show prices have come down considerably. And so when you look at making that move, there's an opportunity to take out cost. And even just looking around at what type of applications are being used and are tied into that phone system. A lot of phone systems we encounter have been built and coupled and added on to over the last 10 years plus. So there's applications that are sitting and being supported and paid for that aren't really in use today. So an opportunity for cleanup there as well. One thing that I think is particularly important, especially in a day and age where our users are just on application overload, is improving the employee experience and customer experience as well, just in general within the organization. Interesting stat, if you haven't seen this, is excuse me, IT, the spend on IT has surpassed telecom spend last year for the first time in the history of, you know, tracking this type of data. And so what that really means is that the IT buyer is now become the owner of telecom and responsible for it. And as such, the IT buyer today is much more of a best experience um, thinking and taking that kind of strategy as opposed to a best of breed. So when thinking about integrating into Teams calling, I mean, it's simple. It's one client, it's fully integrated, everything is working together, familiarity for the end user. They're most probably 9.5 out of 10 times using Teams already for chat, meetings, making calls internally. So giving the opportunity to just improve that experience, have it more integrated, and have your end users just be happier and more confident is pretty huge. Touch on the AI one of a sec, but really, again, there's lots of different advantages for moving into Teams calling, and especially if Microsoft is a key strategic aspect of your organization, tying this kind of final communication element into the overstack is just going to provide a ton of benefits. And there's the thought out there that kind of voice is dead and that nobody's using the phone anymore and that it's all texting. And while I'm not going to pretend like people don't text and message a ton in the enterprise, voice is always used for those more important, those more relevant conversations out there. And so still within an organization, it's still seen to be very, very important. Just think about productivity. I see this all the time, whether it's in my organization or outside. People are trying to have a conversation over text and people aren't getting each other, and it's back and forth, when just simply picking up the phone and having a conversation 5 minutes would save a ton of time and confusion and frustration. Just pick up the darn phone and let's hash it out and discuss it and get on the same page. There's opportunities to improve service capability here. The image when you could actually speak to someone, if you think about a time where you've had to get in touch with an organization for a customer service related issue and you're constantly behind these firewalls of chat and can never reach anybody, it's super frustrating. But we can actually talk to somebody and work out the problem, it makes such a tremendous difference, and you build a little bit more intimacy and tie into that organization. So voice is still really, really important. And I think the third component that we'll talk about is what's driving all of this Microsoft team calling. Like, we can't not take into account the potential for AI and the value of benefiting from it in a Copilot fashion. And I'm not going to spend too much time talking about Copilot and AI today. I'm kind of going to end it over here. But if you look at some of the data on this slide, you'll see some of the top drivers and use cases around AI are all related to voice, from customer service to digital assistants to customer relationships. And as a result, integrating that final component within your overall Microsoft collaboration strategy. You've already got chat, you've already got meetings, and now integrating voice just gives you the opportunity to mine and leverage all of that data for inferences about what's happening within your customer base, with your partners, and you're really positioned well for anything that you want to do leveraging Copilot or AI in the future. If your voice is the only communication piece sitting outside on a separate PBX, you're just not tying in all of the data into the same place, and you're going to be missing out. So it's just another reason you've already made the investments and buy-in and decisions to that buy into that Microsoft strategy. Tying voice is a one of the more final but value add pieces to leverage all of this rich communication data that's existing in your environment. Just pause for a sec. Makes sense so far? Any questions or thoughts before we move on? Okay. Okay. Cool. So, I think what I would say here is telephony has gone from, I think, being a strategic application on the network to a critical application on the network. The same way we need electricity, the same way we need internet access or Wi-Fi, whether we're at home or actually in the office, it's become critical. But there are some things that have been slowing down the move. Microsoft has been tremendously successful. They've got over 20 million users on Teams phone using PSTN access, which is probably 2.5 to 3 times more than their next closest competitor, whether it's a Cisco or Ring Central, a Zoom. But there are still elements that are slowing it down that I want to address for you all today. One is there's a lot of confusion around what Teams Phone actually means, and it's driven from all the different ways that you can acquire, integrate, or use or buy PSTN. And so I'll walk through all of the options actually, and demystify some of the things like calling plans and operator connect and whatnot. One of the other things that slows down the move is whatever existing carrier commitments you may have with your existing carriers. Within a calling environment, you can certainly continue with whatever carrier you are with today, but in a lot of cases, like we spoke about a little before, it's an opportunity to make a change, maybe improve service, maybe reduce cost, whatever it may be. But a carrier that has the potential of losing your contract and your numbers does not make it easy to make a move. So we'll talk about how to get around that and what's important. And there's also some internal expertise that tends to resist making some of these changes. For true telecom folks, the IT world is scary. It's a different language, it's unknown. And so trying something new and really getting to a completely new environment is a little bit scary. So there's still, we see a lot of resistance from more traditional telecom teams. And so how do we make these folks feel comfortable? And this isn't a negative, but more an opportunity to have new challenges, to learn new skills, to almost future-proof their ability, because understanding voice and being able to support, manage, operate voice is still really important. There's just a different language to learn as we integrate with potentially a Microsoft environment, but it does open a lot of doors to future-proof careers and whatnot moving forward. So let's kind of start at the beginning, and this is a busy slide, which I probably should adjust and change, but I'd like to direct you here onto the top where you see kind of these 5 options. So there's Teams calling plans, Operator Connect, Teams mobile phone, direct routing, and direct routing as a service. So let's walk through this stuff. By the way, just before I jump in, I don't want to be monotonous if this is super clear. Does this make sense for everybody to kind of walk through and kind of just explain to make sure we're all on the same page? Just quick show of hands. Does that make sense? Yeah, looks good. Okay, cool. Sorry, again, I just want to make sure that this stuff is relevant and worthwhile for everybody. I don't want to just very conscious of your time. So let's start with calling plans. Calling plans are what Microsoft's, you buy these directly from Microsoft. They are Microsoft calling plans, and you pretty much have access from your tenant to purchase these on your own. They will be activated almost immediately. And if you've got a simple, standard, smaller type of environment, it doesn't really matter on the size, but your needs around telephony are fairly standard and basic. These could be a really good option for you. You buy them from Microsoft directly. You don't need to deal with any carriers. They will work through with you to help you port numbers, no problem. And these plans typically are a couple of bucks per user per month. They might have, a couple of 100 minutes included. There's a couple of different varieties of plans. A lot of inbound calling is free. Fairly effective, very simple to use, fairly basic. What it does mean, though, is you are typically on your own to become the manager of PSTN with Microsoft there on the back end, but you're not getting, Microsoft support is not like what it might be with your carrier, and that respectfully, that might not be so great to begin with, but some of the other IT organizations you work with from a support perspective, you can't get immediate access, someone from Microsoft on the phone. You are going to have to wait probably upwards of 48 plus hours to get help. So again, these things work, but they're fairly basic in nature. So depending on the type of organization you have and your needs around telephony, they can serve a purpose maybe for some of your sites, but maybe not for everything. We've then got an operator connect model, and I think this is where most of the FUD, at least we've seen in the industry, exists. Again, operator connect is really PSTN driven by largely the core traditional carriers around the globe, just offering PSTN in a package format that's directly, I'll call it super integrated within Microsoft. So the integration is terrific. It's PSTN, it works well. But I think where some of the FUD and myths exist around Operator Connect is that Teams calling is Operator Connect. It isn't. Operator Connect is PSTN the same way in your environment today. You have PSTN from somebody already. This is just PSTN in a Microsoft Teams calling world. And what do I mean by not a full solution? Well, if you've got analog devices, if you need faxing, if you need recording, if you need paging, if you need contact center, if you need support on some other aspects of the environment, like configurations in your tenant, support on if there's an issue on your tenant or on your network side, Operator Connect doesn't do any of that stuff, and it won't, because it is designed to provide you with PSTN, make sure that PSTN is up and running, and that's it, that's all. That's not a bad thing. It's just important to be educated to understand what you're buying so you don't get disappointed if some of those other elements that I spoke about aren't available. Some of the other things I think it's important to know around Operator Connect is, while this stuff works great and there's services globally for Operator Connect, some of the more recent countries to open up with some Operator Connect models are even in India, where procuring or sourcing PSTN is typically challenging because it's very reliant on the local carriers and they haven't opened this up to the broader ecosystem. So from there, it can be a very valuable tool. But what I do think it's important to share and know is These days, if you look in your tenant portal, there's maybe 70 plus, if not 80 different operators providing Operator Connect. They are not all true independent operator connectors, if that's even a word. It's a lot of a resell of a resell of a resell. So therefore, just important to know who you're buying from it and where, because if it's a resell off a resell off a resale and you have a support issue, that organization that sold it to you might have to work its way 2, 3 times till they can actually get a fix. So again, I'm not trying to scare anybody by any means. I'm just more trying to be transparent so you have an idea. And when you're choosing your provider of telephony, just be informed so that you know what you're getting and ask the right questions so it's clear. That's really where I'm coming from. The next one is Teams mobile, phone mobile. It's an Operator Connect that is really completely tied to mobile phone, where the carriers are providing you with one business number that becomes native on your phone. So it's your true business line directly on your phone and doesn't interfere with your own personal line on your phone. Very cool. So you could have your one number, business number on here, still owned and managed by the organization. So in some companies, that phone number is a pretty valuable piece of real estate. Think about a salesperson who all their customers interact with them and call them on their cell phone. If that person leaves the organization and takes their number with them, well, when their customer is going to call back and that salesperson's at a different company, pretty easy for them to potentially swing the business to a different organization. If that phone remains with the business, that real estate stays in such, and the organization has a better chance of keeping the business. That's just one example. I can go into many, but just to give you some ideas. Very, very interesting solution. It hasn't taken off like crazy yet. I believe there's only 3 carriers globally that support this. So there's Verizon in the US, there's Rogers up in Canada, and I believe BT British Telecom overseas in the UK. There will probably be more, but as such, it is an interesting option. Depending on your use cases and how you work, it could fit. And then there's the direct routing option. This is the most complete and most flexible because it really touches. There are no limits. You can do anything with this solution. It allows you to integrate your analog devices, any of the other third-party applications. It is really the most flexible option. You can have your SBCs on-prem. You could buy them and host them on-prem. You could buy them and host them in the cloud in your own data centers. There's lots of providers that offer these hosted and managed for you in their cloud. So very good flexibility here. And the only difference between direct routing and direct routing as a service is one is provided to you as a service. So you as an organization or a customer don't have to manage the phone system anymore. You buy it and purchase it as a service from a third party. So we offer a direct routing as a service option, just again to make it simple and easy for customers who in 2024 don't want to have to manage their phone system anymore. They've got more strategic applications that they want their team and resources to be focused on. But as far as capabilities goes, from a direct routing and direct routing as a service, they can both do anything. One is a little bit more manual. One is offered to you completely as a service. I'm going to pause just because I'm saying a lot really quick. Any questions, comments, thoughts before I go on?
Looks like Matthew, you have your hand up. Do you have a question or is it still up from the?
Oh, it's
Raise
still
your
up from
hand if
earlier.
it's
Sorry.
okay.
I just brought down.
Yep, I thought probably, but wanted to make sure.
The only other thing I would add is you don't have to think about when you're making a move into telephony as this is a one size fits all and you have to choose you can, I mean, ideally you're choosing one that you could work with, but you may end up having a mix of some of this in your environment depending on the size of your organization, how it's set up and configured today, or just how it operates, geographically where you are. So we see a lot of customers that may have direct routing as a service as an option, but then there's certain smaller sites that have, a handful of people. It's basic telephony, and they've just purchased some calling plans because it didn't require or necessitate anything more than that. So again, like, this isn't a one size fits all. You can use some of the all of the above depending on your use cases and your requirements to use that. And that's pretty cool because it puts a lot of flexibility and control into your hands to make the right moves and adjust. You're not like hooked up and connected with one provider if you don't want to be. Finally, I think we spoke about this. PSTN is just Operator Connect is really just PSTN. So now I'm going to get into some Teams calling best practices, and this is coming based on from our experience with doing a ton of these deployments and working with all sorts of different customers over the last 4 years. We've really started our Microsoft journey about 4 years ago, so this is where it's coming from. It's evolved quite a bit, and so I'm going to kind of jump into this. Joshua, I've got about what, like 15, 20 minutes just to be safe. Just want to make sure I'm timing myself right. Is that fair?
Yep. Sound good.
Okay, cool. Great. So one of the things I think it's important to think about is, and we touched on this a little bit before, let's reduce the variables as much as possible. And this is a snapshot from a whole bunch of different things, but just thinking about on the phone side, on the video conferencing side and chat side, a big part of the value of this exercise is to reduce this as much as possible. So your users, again, have one client, one simple device, that's easy for them to use and manage and gives them the confidence. We believe very strongly that BYOD is still very, very relevant and important for organizations. I kind of make the joke or analogy to, like, we don't tell our team, we don't buy their shoes for them. We let everybody buy the shoes based on whatever their preferences are, whether it's style, comfort, price, whatever it is. What we do want is when someone puts on their shoes, they're comfortable and confident. So choosing the device that works for them so they feel confident when they're working at home, in the office, on the road, in the car, whatever everybody does that's super busy, making sure that they have a device that's really well so that they have, consistency across the touch points. Where I'm going to go in a little bit deeper now is focusing what some best practices are across the Teams calling journey. I'm going to give you an example from each phase. Again, like I touched on a little bit earlier in the conversation, most of the market and providers are focused on day one. And again, it's important. You want the implementation to go really well. You want it to go smooth. I'm not dismissing that. What I am suggesting when you look at this data, and this isn't like Stephen Karashinsky or Zero data, this is Gartner Forrester data, and anything you've ever looked at around TCO will show you that the vast majority of the time and dollars and effort spent on any technology solution is day two. Once the thing is installed, then you're living with this thing, so you got to operate it. So we're going to talk a lot about things that we're doing on the support side and upfront on the evaluation side, because if you do a good job on the evaluation side, day one is smooth and easygoing. So just some context as you're thinking about this stuff. Really, really important on the beginning and day two. There's an opportunity to do some stuff. So for us, one of the biggest challenges upfront is that we find when customers are thinking about making a move or having to make a move, the biggest challenge is figuring out what they have and what they're using today. And what we have come up with is that if you can figure out what you have and make this much more of a data-driven conversation, everything else is easier, because all of the concern, risk, perception about what are we missing, who's even using a phone anymore, do I need to buy hard devices, what services are there that we may miss, what about those analog devices there, all of that stuff. If you can source, and there's some different services out on the market, there's tools that you can purchase. We've developed some tooling that can go in and scan any one of the top 20 most popular PBXs that are out there on the market today and pull all of the data. So what your numbers are, what carriers you're with, what rate centers they're with, what your hunt groups look like, how your auto attendants are mapped out, who's even using the phone. And instead of this being a painful, laborious, or administrative exercise for you or your colleagues on the IT side, if you can find some tooling and services out there to capture this information, next day, instead of spending time doing that, you immediately engage in a productive conversation about what it's going to look like and take to move this stuff forward. We found this to be a real game changer on anybody considering and thinking about a migration to Teams calling. So you have all the data at your fingertips, and then you could juxtapose that into what things look like in a Microsoft Teams calling environment. And this is kind of where the magic happens, because Microsoft Teams calling has come a long way. It can do, like, there's a myth out there that it's not a real PBX, that Microsoft doesn't care about telephony, that they're not committed to it. That's not true. Microsoft Teams can go toe to toe with anything out there in the market, unless you've got some real particular requirements, and there are some that are like that. So I'm not saying Microsoft Teams calling can do everything for everybody, but I am saying it can do probably 90%. And so once you have all of that data, we evaluate what this would look like in a Microsoft Teams world, because, like I said, it can do a lot of the same things, but it may do things a different way. So, for example, if you've got something like Cisco in your environment, there's this concept of multi-line on devices. Microsoft doesn't have multi-line, but they have delegate lines, private lines, and other aspects. So they just do things in a little bit of a different way and have a bit of a different vocabulary. Understanding that and being able to map it to what actually works makes a huge difference. And so if you'd like some info on what exists out there or whatever, just DM me and I will provide you with can help point you in the right direction. But if you can make this a data-driven approach, it's gonna change the whole experience, and it won't be like that climbing Mount Everest thing. It'll make the project a lot easier. Just some examples that we get through is one of the biggest questions, and I mentioned this before, but I'm bringing it up again because it's important, is the question comes up is like, who's using a phone today? We don't even know. Like, we're all making calls internally in the organization. I have to buy all these licenses now. Do I really need it for all these people? Well, getting a sense of what utilization actually looks like in your calling environment today is huge. We had a customer, we did this for a couple of weeks ago. They have 1,100 users, and they were asking these kind of questions. So we ran a scan, and it came out that like 350 of those users haven't picked up the phone, a call inbound or outbound, over the last 3 months. So beautiful. Instead of them buying a phone system add-on for those users, they're just not going to give them a call. They're going to let them use their cell phone, and they're going to save on the PSTN and DIDs for that group. Another angle might be is to leverage some of the different capabilities that Teams calling offers. So there's this concept of shared calling, which is super popular. Microsoft is promoting this like crazy. It's not really a new invention, but I think their teams have caught on of how this can help. So in that example that I just gave you, if they've got 1,100 people, but 350 don't use the phone, but we want to give them the capability of receiving a call internally and being able to make an outbound call, let's just say, God forbid, for 911, you can have a traditional phone system license for the first group, but then leverage shared call. Well, so everyone needs a phone system license in that case, sorry. But you can leverage shared calling for those 350 users. So we don't have to provide them with DIDs. The cost becomes lower. It's more efficient to manage and move on. So again, having access to the data will provide some solutioning to help make this a lot easier. On the day one side, I think some of the most important aspects are really around the porting piece, because today a lot of the actual builds of these profiles within the Teams tenant are fairly standard. It could be done fairly easily. Again, there's lots of companies on the market. We could help you out as well. But if you can really nail the porting portion, this is the most, it's not a technical exercise, it's an administrative exercise. And what's important to have down packed when you're thinking about porting is what numbers do you need, have in use? Who's the carrier associated with those numbers? And then the rate center identify with those numbers. And those three elements need to be documented in what's called a letter of authorization, an LOA, and a CSR, a customer service record, to be presented to the carrier to make a switch. Now, by law, they cannot withhold the numbers. It is open season. You can have your number and move it wherever you want. But if you don't have these elements right, they will refuse or reject your port, send you back to the beginning. So again, there's some tools and services out there to help you automate a lot of this process. We can walk you through some of this stuff if it's ever appropriate, or just share a little bit more on some how-tos, because it could be a little laborious if they're not well documented within your environment. You've got to grab your bills, you got to comb through each one, you kind of got to almost copy and paste, put them in a spreadsheet, and then evaluate them. And sometimes, like I mentioned before, because the phone system has just evolved over time and your organization may have purchased numbers along the way from different carriers, you may think all your numbers are with Verizon, but in the fact at the end, they've been purchased over time by like 4 or 5 different carriers. So if you go to Verizon to submit the port request for all of those numbers, they're going to refuse some, because if they don't own the numbers, well, they can't port you over. Getting a lot of this ahead of time is going to make what you may have experienced or heard as a porting nightmare really a porting non-event. And so if you plan this out properly, your implementations are smooth, your cutovers really have no risk, they become non-event, and the whole thing could be done in 10, 20 minutes. We're doing cutovers these days, and it's a non-issue and very smooth. Just nailing this piece is really important. I mean, again, there's services, we can help you do this stuff, and this isn't a sales pitch story, but if you get this and you want to port your numbers, it's going to make your lives a lot easier. And then the last piece, and I'll kind of just do this quickly because I know we're almost ending out of time, is really just thinking about how you're going to support and manage this new environment. Again, most of the time, the IT folks within the organization, those folks managing that are super comfortable with the Office 365 tenant and Teams Admin Center and whatnot, they're certainly comfortable, and it's not so hard to learn these skills and be able to manage that. But having some of that telecom expertise around moves, adds, and changes and things like that may need to be learned. So there's a bunch of different tools out there that can help you automate a lot of the moves, adds, and changes that exist, so you don't have to have your level 2, your level 3 admins spending a lot of their time doing moves, adds, and changes, because these changes need to get done, but they're more of a P4 within the organization. When I say P4, kind of like a change that has to be made, but it's not urgent and critical. It's just something that's got to get done. But because they all tend to flow to a level 2 or level 3 administrator or engineer, they take a lot of time because they're not urgent and everybody's busy and got stuff to do. So there's some tooling out there that can, in a safe, secure way, push these changes down to level 1 help desk folks, office managers, site managers. You can automate these changes today completely by integrating with an ITSM system like ServiceNow or Surewell, and it takes a huge load off of the team. It reduces the cost of making these moves, adds, and changes in a significant way, and also creates this opportunity through role-based access control of providing these folks with the rights and area of what to manage, and limits their ability to affect the whole system, because no one wants to give tons of people access to Teams Admin Center and then potentially affect other elements that aren't telephony related. So through some of these tools, you can manage your phone numbers a little bit easier. You can get off spreadsheets so you're not rebuying numbers that you already have. If you've got an inventory of some, really just making the whole process around day two simple, efficient, and easy to use. And so again, there's a bunch of tools out there around provisioning, Teams calling support and management, and I'd be happy to point you in the right direction if you wanted to evaluate a couple of these as well. So I'm talking a little bit quick. I've gone through a lot, but wanted to give you a couple of areas to think about and consider. I think I'll end by just saying what could be perceived as a massive, undergoing, and super complex project really isn't and doesn't have to be at the end of the day if it's well planned and you've got access to the right people on your side. So again, I hope this session was worthwhile. If there was one piece of info or nugget you took away from the today, I think I've done a good job then, and I hope it was valuable. You see my contact info on the screen. If you'd like more information or me to help point you in the right direction, it's my pleasure. You can direct message me and reach out to me on Teams. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn. And again, wish you lots of success and thank you again for your time today.